So welcome to today's webinar, Understanding Unions. My name is Chris Barrera, and I have almost 20 years of payroll and HR administration experience. That experience includes managing and directing human capital management systems, implementation and service, as well as business process outsourcing on end-to-end HR and payroll. I hold certifications from SHRM and HRCI, as well as a certification as a project management professional with PMI. And I have over a decade of experience training HR and admin professionals in various webinars, conferences, and seminars. Just some quick housekeeping for the webinar. You will be muted throughout the presentation, but again, you can always chat a question. Josh is also on and able to help me monitor. We're going to have a few poll questions throughout the webinar, so we ask that you participate and we'll share the results with you. Just a little disclaimer. This is not legal advice, just information to consider. Please always consult with your local counsel and your own HR human resources office before implementing any practice or policy. This is not the final word on the topic today that we're highlighting. We only have a short amount of time based on the time allotment for the webinar on understanding unions. So this is basically a basic overview. There's a lot more to learn on the topic at the end of the webinar. I'll provide or will provide you an opportunity to get a copy of the webinar with all the links that has a lot of additional information and on the topics that we're going to talk about today. And lastly, this is not a political opinion or statement, just providing information. So for those of you who are SHRM or HRCI certified, this is a qualified or pre-approved webinar. It's good for one PDC for both HRCI and SHRM. We will be providing certificates with the ID number. And that usually comes in a few days. If you need it right away, email me directly and I'll get you those numbers. We do put the recording on the website, so we don't list the ID numbers in the presentation. We also recommend that you log into your portals regularly and add your PDCs as soon as you get them. It's always an issue to try to do that at the last minute, so try to take care of it as you get them. If you have any questions about recertification, please visit the SHRM or HRCI website, but you can also email me directly at chrisb@hubengage.com. I have a lot of experience with the recertifications and I can answer a lot of questions. All participants are recorded electronically and their total time participating is documented. Full participation is required. Each participant, as I mentioned, will both receive an HRCI and SHRM certificate for attending the webinar with the account activity ID. All right. So today's topic, understanding unions. When we try to pick topics that are very topical, that are out in the landscape or HR or employer landscape, we certainly had a lot of talk about unions in 2022. So we thought it'd be fun to do a webinar and give folks, some history of unions and other valuable information. The U.S. organized labor is having a moment, just after decades of erosion in both influence and power, giving workers the best chance in recent memory to claw back lost ground. In the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, unions are finding that suddenly have the upper hand, or at least more solid footing, when it comes to negotiating wages and benefits, which are spurring a flurry of new picket lines. Nearly 40 workplaces across the nation have gone on strike since August 1st of 2022, according to Bloomberg's law database of work stoppages, almost double the number during the same period last year. The labor movement in the United States grew out of a need to protect the common interests of workers. For those in the industrial sector, organized labor unions fought for better wages, more reasonable hours, safer working conditions. And then the labor movement led to efforts to stop child labor law, give health benefits, and provide aid to workers who were injured or retired. The origins of the labor movement lay in the formative years of the American nation, when a free wage labor market emerged in the artisan trades late in the colonial period. The earliest recorded strike occurred in 1768 when New York journeyman tailors protested a wage reduction. The formation of the Federal Society of Journeymen Cordwainers, or shoemakers, in Philadelphia in 1794, marks the beginning of a sustained trade union organization among American workers. Today's objectives, we are going to cover the history of unions. We'll talk about some recent landmark events or union events that have happened in 2022. We'll talk a little bit about employees' rights to organize and what that means. Talk a little bit about union and the law. We'll talk about how employers can educate employees about unions. And then, of course, we'll end with union best practices. So really quickly, we're going to do our first poll. And our first poll is, when was the first labor union created? I'll just give you guys a chance to answer there. All right. So yeah, definitely everybody got that right. 1794 was the first labor union that was created. So, a lot of times we think about, labor unions in this century or before, but yeah, way back in time, 1794 was the first labor union. All right, there you go. So let's talk a little bit about the history. And so we already talked about the first labor union, but let's talk about the first strike. 1768, America's first labor strike. According to history.com, the first recorded labor strike occurred in New York in 1768 when journeyman tailors refused to work in a protest of wage reductions. In 1794, the first union is formed, and we just talked about that, starting with the shoemakers who formed the Federal Society of Journeymen Cordwainers in Philadelphia. Local craft unions emerged in cities throughout the country. They published price requirements for their work and demanded shorter working days. In 1886, we had the AFL is founded. The most well-known labor and trade union, the American Federation of Labor, was founded in 1886 and was successful in negotiating wage increases for members and for safety improvements for all workers. 1911, we had the Triangle Straight Waste Company fire. This killed 150 workers. In the fire, mainly young women, because the safety exits in the lofts in the New York City's Lower East Side had been locked, apparently in an effort to prevent theft. The tragedy eventually led to many industrial safety reforms and fire prevention measures, led by workers' rights advocate Francis Perkins, who also established government policies for working with labor unions, while the U.S. Secretary of Labor with the U.S. Secretary of Labor from 1933 to 1945. In 1938, the Fair Labor Standards Act was passed, and this is the first time we see minimum wage and 40-hour work week. This week, that the law was passed. It was supported by the AFL, even though most union workers were earning much more than minimum wage. 1955, the AFL-CIO was born. The AFL merged with another well-known union, the Congress of Industrial Organizations, or CIO, to form the AFL-CIO. 1970, The Organizational Safety and Health Act passed. This act formed OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, and the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health. Its goal, or main goal, was to ensure that employers provide employees with workplaces that were free from known hazards. Unions helped get this legislation passed, as well as workers' compensation laws in many states, which holds employers accountable for workplace safety. And then lastly, we flash forward to 2022. We have 14 million U.S. workers who belong to unions. Today, more than 60 unions throughout the country represent workers in all industries. They help workers increase their income, improve their working conditions, and they settle disputes with management. They get training and education and a whole lot more. This is just another shot at the history of unions in the U.S. Obviously, I gave you a little bit of a summary on the previous slide, but here's kind of an overlook from between 1768, which was the first record of the strike, all the way to modern times. I find it interesting that in 2021 that non-union workers had a median weekly earning that were 83% of earnings for union members. So, roughly almost 20% of union members earn more than non-union workers, according to experts and statistics. So let's talk a little bit more about the history of unions, and let's talk about the membership rate. Here is a slide and a graph from OECD data, and it shows a rapid decline since the 1960s of unions in the United States. And while I have hard statistics going back all the way to 1983, this is when we actually started, or the Bureau of Labor Statistics actually started tracking these statistics. The union membership rate is the percentage of wage and salary workers who were members of the union. This was 10.1% in 2022, down from 10.3% in 2021, according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. The number of wage and salary workers belonging to unions at 14.3 million in 2022 increased by 273,000 or 1.9% from 2021. Okay, so in 2022, we saw an increase from 2021 by 273,000 new union members. However, the total number of wage and salary workers grew by 5.3 million or 3.9%. This disproportionately large increase in the number of total wage and salary employment compared with the increase in the number of union members led to a decrease in the union membership rate. The 2022 unionization rate of 10.1% for 2022 is the lowest on record. In 1983, the year where comparable union data was available, the union membership rate was 20.1%, and there were 17.7 million union workers. What is interesting is that in 2022, there was actually an increase in union workers, right? So we're seeing this increase in activity in 2022, and there was actually an increase in union workers. But because the market was so hot and we had so many people entering the labor market, that really diluted the union member unionization rate, because it is compared to overall wage and salary workers. So even though it is down to its lowest period ever, there was an increase in union participation or union membership, excuse me. So I want to also include the history of unions. I wanted to show a slide in how union membership rates are by state. And you can look at this while I'm going through the slide, but you can see here, we have dark black showing 20% or more. You can see some participation here on the West Coast. You can see this easily divided into the Midwest and the South. So I'll let you kind of look at those statistics for a minute while I go through this. So 50 years ago, nearly a third of U.S. workers belonged to a union. Today, it's 1 in 10. But the decline has not been the same for every state. As I'm showing you here in this map provided by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, showing how union membership has changed across the country. In an analysis of Gallup's 2021 and 2022 Work and Education survey, finds that the following demographics in union membership among U.S. workers. More than 1 in 3 workers employed by the government, 37%, belong to a union versus 7% of all private sector employees. Workers in the South are less likely of any U.S. region to report being part of a union, with 6% saying they belong. It's roughly half or less percentage reported by employees in the East, 11%, employees in the Midwest, which are at 14%, and in the West, 17%. According to Gallup, 15% of workers reporting an annual household income of $100,000 or more are members of a union, compared with 12% of those in households between $40,000 and $99,000 annually, and 6% for those in households earning less than $40,000 per year. Across age groups, union membership is highest among workers aged 55 and older, which is at 16%, compared to workers aged 35 to 54, which is coming in at 12%, and workers ages 18 to 35 coming in at 8%. Reflecting the strong public sector skew to union membership, the more educated an employee is, the more likely they are to be a member of a labor union. The rate is highest at 18% among workers with a postgraduate degree. Workers with a high school degree are less than 8%, and are the least likely to be a union member. According to Gallup, there are no significant differences in union membership across gender or political party groups. The Bureau of Labor Statistics does have a lot of information that's out there. If you wanted to dig a little more in detail on how that pans out between, political affiliations and men and women, races and things of that nature, a lot of data available by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. All right, so let's take another quick poll. And let me ask you a question. What recent employer has had publicity for union activity recent? And let's just say 2022. Okay. All right. So this is kind of a trick question. I'll end the poll there. 100% said Starbucks, and yeah, definitely have been in the news for the most, and probably in significant the number of activity that's happening over at Starbucks related to union activity. But yes, it's actually, it's like I said, a trick question. We've seen union activity both for Apple and Trader Joe's. So all three of these companies have had recent publicity for union activity. So let's talk about some of these recent events. Unions just had one of the best years in terms of growing membership so far for this century. And I mentioned that grew by 273,000 or up to 14.3 million union workers in 2022, despite that explanation on membership percentage being down. And the number of recent union election petitions filed with the National Labor Relations Board increased by more than 50% in 2022. But the high-profile organizing wins at Starbucks, Amazon, and Apple stores are only a small part of that success. A boom in hiring by a number of already unionized employers drove an increase of 200,000 or 1.3%. That was the biggest gain since 2015, according to statistics released by the Labor Department. There was even a larger jump in the number of workers who are due pay in union members, an additional 273,000 that represented the biggest rise since 2008, bringing that total to 14.3 million. Still, union members make up only 10.1% of workers overall last year. As I mentioned, a nudge down from the 10.3 in 2021. Among the most prominent wins in union efforts this year comes from workers at two major companies. We already talked about one of them. One of them was Starbucks, and the other was Amazon. Starbucks workers alone won more than 260 union elections since a Buffalo store became the first union to be unionized in December of 2021. In April of 2022, the Staten Island Amazon warehouse workers won their union election, a historic first for the company. Now, these are big multi-billion-dollar industries, and they're having union activity in their shops. And I can assure you that they spent a lot of money on education and training and trying to communicate with employees, letting them know, what unions are. But while Amazon and Starbucks may have dominated the labor headlines this year, they weren't the only places that workers were organizing. More industries saw union efforts in 2022, as well as from the video game industry and animation, to Apple, which we just talked about, museums and libraries. The first Trader Joe's to unionize did so in Massachusetts in July of 2022. A second one followed in August. And after United Farm Workers marched in August, California Governor Gavin Newsom signed a bill making it easier for agricultural workers to join unions. After high-profile wins at places like Amazon, Starbucks, Trader Joe's, the question now is whether those unions can actually secure their first contracts in 2023. So there's no guarantee it will happen, as negotiations can often drag out. The Philadelphia Museum of Art Workers ratified their first contract in 2022, 2 years after unionizing. So all we're saying here is, yes, there's been a lot of union activity, and we've had a lot of unions petitions be recognized, and they voted and they've unionized. But the hard part is still negotiating with employers to earn that first contract and make it through that process, which can be, as demonstrated by talking about the Philadelphia Museum of Art Workers, can be a very long and complicated process for these unions to actually earn that contract. So let's talk about employees' rights to organize. The National Labor Relations Board guarantees the right of employees to organize and bargain collectively with their employers and to engage in other protected concerted activities. Employers covered by the NLRB are protected from certain types of employer and union misconduct. Under the NLRA, employees have a right to organize a union, to negotiate with employers concerning wages, hours, and other terms of conditions of employment. Employees have a right to form or join or assist a union. Bargain collectively through representatives of employees' own choosing for contract with your employer, with employers setting wages, benefits, hours, and other working conditions. Employees have the right to they also have the right to discuss terms and conditions of employment or union organizing with coworkers for a union. They have the right to take action with one or more coworkers to improve working conditions by other means, raising work-related complaints directly with the employer or with a government agency, and seeking help from a union. They have the right to strike and picket, depending on the purpose or the means of the strike or picketing. And they have the right to choose not to do any of these activities, including joining or remaining in a member of a union. Well, now we're going to do just one more poll here. And let me get that selected. And just quickly ask you, see if everyone is still awake. What government agency is responsible for labor relations? All right, yeah, very good. Everybody got that one, the National Labor Relations Board. Now, the Department of Labor does, provide information to employees and to employers around labor relations. And while they don't have a direct role in governing those type of activities, they certainly take a role in letting people know what their rights are. The Department of Labor has posters that are available for employers to post out in their workplaces and provide other types of information. So yes, the National Labor Relations Board. So thank you for participating in that. So let's talk a little bit more about union and the law. The National Labor Relations Board is an independent federal agency vested with the power to safeguard employees' rights to organize and to determine whether to have unions as their bargaining representative. The agency also acts to prevent and remedy unfair labor practices committed by private sector employees and unions. And today we're predominantly talking about private sector employers, right? The federal government employees have a right to organize, and they have their own agency that helps manage that. But here we're talking about private firms and private labor. So what does the NLRB do? Well, they conduct elections. Okay, so if employees wish to form a union, they help certify or decertify an existing union, and you can also submit an election petition to the nearest regional office in order to be able to do that. The NLRB is also responsible for investigating charges that maybe have been violated by the employer or labor organization. And there is a process. Now, I listed in the resources today the process for that. It's not complex, but pretty long. So I've listed those resources for you here, but we're just kind of talking high level what the NLRA is responsible for. They also facilitate settlements. The NLRB encourages parties to resolve cases by settlement rather than litigation whenever possible. In fact, more than 90% of unfair labor practice cases are settled by agreement at some point in the process, either through the board settlement or through a private agreement. The NLRB is also responsible for deciding cases. So when complaints of unfair labor practices are issued by the regional directors, and they do not lead to settlement, they typically result in a hearing before the NLRB administrative law judge. And as any court proceeding, both parties prepare arguments and present evidence, witnesses, and experts. They also enforce orders. In reviewing cases, the circuit courts evaluate the factual and legal basis for the basis order and decide after briefings or oral arguments whether to enter into a judicial decree commanding obedience of the order. The court may also enter an order on the grounds that the responsible party failed to oppose or had no legal basis to oppose the board's action. And then lastly, the NLRB is responsible for rulemaking as part of an ongoing effort to more effectively administer the National Labor Relations Act. And to further the purpose of the act, the National Labor Relations Board engages in rulemaking in a number of important areas. Okay. So let's talk about employers and unions in the law. Under the National Labor Relations Board, the NLRB, that's a typo there, it is illegal for an employer to prohibit employees from soliciting a union during non-work time, such as before or after work or during break times, or from disrupting union literature during non-work time in a non-work area, such as parking lots, break rooms, etc. The NLRB makes it illegal for an employer to ask questions to employees about their support or activities in a manner that discourages them from engaging in that activity. And then more directly, the law protects them from being fired, demoted, or transferred, have a reduction in hours, a change in shift, or any type of retaliation against them, or threaten to take any of these actions because they join or support a union. Threaten to lose their workplace if workers choose a union to represent them. So, threatening that they're going to close down a workplace or close down an office. Promise or grant promotions, pay raises, or other benefits to discourage or encourage union support. So as a direct result, not, I guess, lack of a better word, bribing them with some type of benefit, right, during this process. Prohibit them from wearing union hats, buttons, t-shirts, and pins at the workplace, except under special circumstances. So there's some employers that wear uniforms and other things, and maybe that wouldn't be safe or appropriate, but for the most part, that is protected. And then lastly, and these are abbreviated actions, right? There's a whole list of them on the NLRB website, and I provided links for you. Again, this is a summary. Lastly, spying on videotape of peaceful union activities and gatherings, or pretend to do so. So maybe threatening workers that we know who they are. Okay. All right. So that is union law and what employers or what's illegal for employers to do during union negotiations or employee organizing. So what can employers do to educate employees about unions? And so what can you do, right? I think the most important thing is to maintain direct communication. Let your employees know that the company's desire to maintain a direct connection with them without making them feel threatened in any way during employee union organizing. Explain to employees that they're free to vote yes or no to unionization, but that the company wants to remain union free. And that's okay. And, again, we want to have that open dialogue and making sure that we're sharing information exclusively, and that obviously that could change and would change with a union. Create a safe and clear process for employees to report any type of threatening or coercing behavior. And whether that's by coworkers, whether that's by management, whether that's by a union, right? Make sure that they feel safe in their workplace and that they have a choice. So make sure to communicate those processes for employees and make it inviting for them to feel like they have a place to go. Provide salary information for similar companies in your area for employees to compare. You know, there's that old term that the grass is not always greener on the other side. People can say a lot of things, but, help deliver that with facts. A lot of shops that I work with today have become transparent in their pay. Pay is posted in their policies. How to get to the next level is posted in their policies. And while there is some variation in range in those based on when they started, how long they've been with the company, and other factors, that people understand that why that is and how it's allotted. And so they don't feel that that's arbitrary, right? That there is a way to increase their salary and they have a way to better themselves. Explain to your employees what authorization cards are, what signing them means, and the importance of fully understanding their options before signing. Educate employees about their rights under the National Labor Relations Act and where to turn for additional resources. Again, in the links, I have placed links to the Department of Labor, to the NLRB. There is information for employers to help them educate their employees, get them the correct information so people are not making their assumptions, or they have the ability with resources and facts to determine whether or not what is being told to them is accurate. Educate your management team on appropriate ways to communicate with employees in regards to unions to avoid charges with the NLRB. And I said that I wouldn't make this a political statement, but the Biden administration is very pro-union, and they have seen a marked increase in the activity by the NLRB. So that's changed since this last administration. They are looking closer at these things. So make sure your managers and in employers, if there's a possibility that there's unionization activity going on in your shops, that they're informed and they understand what they can and can't say to employees, so that everybody is on the up and up and everybody's fair. Be willing to listen to employees' grievances and show them that the company is willing to work with them, or work with them with or without a union. And, here at Hub Engage, we provide you a lot of tools to be able to communicate with your employees via smart media devices. But there are many ways to communicate with your employees, gather information, talk to them, and let them know that, they don't necessarily need to have a union to be able to do that. They can talk to your management, your leaders, and human resources freely, and provide grievance information and look for answers. And then lastly, express to the workforce that with or without a union, the company is committed to making a great place to work. Unionization can happen and does happen in shops, but it doesn't change the commitment to the company, right, to still try to make this a great place to work. I think if you communicate those things and what the real outcome is, that you can educate employees directly about what unions can do for them or cannot do for them. All right, understanding union best practices. So I think here, some of the takeaways, right, is making sure that you're reviewing your policies and that they're up to date. They're up to date with all the initiatives that you're doing. They're up to date with your DEI initiatives. They're up to date with your current market, and that you're constantly trying to improve your policies, your benefits, the things that you're providing your employees, right? Make sure that you're benchmarking wages and benefits, and we talked about that, right? Making that information public. Many times we have these great benefits, but we're not communicating that to our employees, or it's not in a accessible place for them to be able to see what the total package is, right? Working for your organization or working in your shop, making that information available, on their smart devices, through a portal, through a communication portal. That's not only communication, training, and other things that they need to focus on, but also what's available to them. Conducting regularly employee and management surveys. And, I do this in my own shop, and sometimes it can seem cliche. It certainly is work to review the information, get the information, make action plans, communicate it to employees, communicated to management and leadership. And it's not always pretty, right? sometimes things aren't good. But if you're not conducting these surveys in an anonymous fashion and not providing a medium to provide employees to give that grievance or that feedback, they're going to look for other methods, right? So it's so important that you're using the tools that are out there, the tools that are available to help you manage that and get that out there. Training management on positive employee labor relations. So not just knowing what yes and no is what you can and can't do according to the NLRB, but truly being engaged with their employees and being positive about what's right, what's not right, and what needs to be worked right. And that comes down all the way from the top. But really, at the end of the day, it's your frontline managers, right, that are having that interaction with your employees and ultimately conveying that message, whether it's right or wrong or different from what's being communicated. So that needs to be monitored and needs to be made sure, right, that that's exactly what's happening out there on the front line. Analyzing your organization's weaknesses, So I showed you a slide earlier about where union activity is most likely, up west, up in the Northeast, in the Midwest, but really it can happen anywhere. But, is there talk, right? How in tune are you with what's going on in your shop? Is there talk about unionizing, those type of things? So if there is, implement a risk and response protocol. How are you going to deal with this? How are you going to respond? How are you going to make sure you're educating everyone about unions and how they operate, will operate in their shop? And then lastly, preparing a first round of union avoidance materials if it comes down to that, right? Being prepared. And again, not really wanting to get into telling you what to do out in your shops, but obviously there's information available out for employers, but there are also organizations out there that make a business in helping you come up with strategies and helping you come up with the communication. I think that also using the tools that you have with you today can also make that easier to get that information out and available to your employees. Okay. All right. So we have a few more minutes left. In conclusion, there has been elevated activity in employee organizing. However, one does the calculations. The trend in union membership is down. It's not up. Even as we see some signs of increasing union activity, we don't know or when if this interest in unions will increase the number of unionized employees significantly. We do know that it will take more than the formation of a few unions at Amazon, Starbucks, and Apple workplaces to affect the national numbers. Given the 258 million adults in the country, it would take an increase of about 3 million unionized workers to move the national estimate of union membership by 1 percentage point. The future is hard and uncertain for unions. The same initiatives apply today as they did yesterday for employee engagement, right? Ultimately, what is certain is that employees want to feel valued and appreciated. They want to have a voice. They want to help facilitate change. They want to have an open dialogue with management and their leaders. They want to belong, be recognized for who they are. They want wages to be transparent. And they want to communicate, and they want to communicate your processes and procedures. And so really, I think at the end of the day, there's union activity, and there's certainly things that we should look out for and be ready for out in the landscape. But for the most part, employees just want to be taken care of. And I think that in the last 18 months that we've been doing these webinars, one thing is a common theme in all of the discussion that we've had, and that's around COVID-19, right? And even I get tired about talking about COVID-19, but it really has changed everything that we do professionally, personally, and everything in our lives. And I think it will for a very long time, if not maybe forever. And I think we've adapted and changed as HR organizations and management leadership teams. And I think those that are truly committed to making sure that employee engagement is front and center, and that our leadership is committed to that. That we're already working on all these things. We've done seminars on DEI, remote work, flexible schedules, and things of that nature. Those are all things that our employers are trying today to make every opportunity for their shops to be a great place to work. And I think as long as we continue to do that, I think we're still chipping away in the positive. But that's it on union activity. I think that we've seen quite a bit. I think we should keep our eyes open. We should see what's aware, and then just make sure that we act appropriately when we need to. Right now, I'm going to see if there are any chats or questions available, or any questions that the participants have for us. Yasha, ask you to help me see if there's any questions. Okay. Well, it doesn't look like, I don't see any questions in the chat. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to thank you for the time today. Please look for our upcoming webinars. We're really working hard to have more valuable and topical topics that are interesting to you and out in our landscape. I will be sending in the next few days your CE certificates, whether you need them or not. And again, thank you for your time. Honored to have you today, and have a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.